This is Michael Popok for Legal AF reporting on some breaking news. Well, it sounds like I'm reporting from the snowpocalypse, but it will be apocalyptic if there is a cooperating witness deep within the White House who's now with the Department of Justice against Donald Trump. Who could that be? Well, all roads lead to Mark Meadows, of all things, the former chief of staff and MAGA loyalist. Mark Meadows, whose 100,000 of emails have already been obtained and reviewed by the Jan 6 committee and by the Department of Justice and Jack Smith at this point, and who is in tremendous legal jeopardy, therefore making him a likely candidate to have the Department of Justice squeeze him and flip him in return for a reduced sentence or no charge for witness tampering. Why witness tampering? Because Mark Meadows' fingerprints are all over trying to convince people like Cassidy Hutchinson from not lawfully, legally, truthfully testifying to the Jan 6 committee and ultimately to the Department of Justice. Mark Meadows is important as a witness, and if he's cooperating, that will make prosecution and conviction of Donald Trump that much easier, because we have to get into the criminal mind of Donald Trump, and we need witnesses who can testify about what was in his mind, and if it rises to the level of what we call mens rea, which is just a fancy way of saying criminal mind, criminal intent. And you can get that either from direct statements of the person who is the charged potential criminal, Donald Trump. Statements like, I can't believe I lost the election. Statements like, I'm not going to leave, I'm only kicking and screaming. I'm going to do everything in my power to cling to power. Those are statements that he made not to himself, but out loud to people like Mark Meadows. Now, some of it was repeated to Cassidy Hutchinson, but we have a better case, a better body of evidence if the person who overheard the conversation and also participated as any good henchman, any good capo in the mob that Donald Trump created, can testify directly about his conversations and his observations with Donald Trump. The witness tampering is a direct line right back to Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows, according to Cassidy Hutchinson, had Ben Williamson in the White House go to her and give her a warning, a message, an extortive message that can't be interpreted any other way but witness tampering, which was, you should have basically a memory hole. Don't remember all the things that you know. Be loyal to Mark Meadows and the boss, Donald Trump, and they will be loyal to you. That's her testimony. But to make sure that that stuck and that she was properly tampered with, Mark Meadows went one better. Mark Meadows is also the link back to the hiring of a lawyer for Cassidy Hutchinson and the payment of that lawyer's fees. That lawyer, Stefan Pasentino, a former partner, an on-leave partner. He's been put on leave by his law firm out of Milwaukee, Michael Best and French out of Milwaukee, but at the time was being paid by Donald Trump's Save America PAC, which would be okay if he revealed that to Cassidy Hutchinson, his client. But when his client asked him, who's paying my bills? Instead, Stefan Pasentino, according to Cassidy Hutchinson, said, you don't need to know that right now. X, wrong. That is already a violation of every rule of professional conduct for a lawyer. If asked a question or not even asked a question by his client, he has to reveal the source of who's paying him so that the client can determine for herself whether his independent professional judgment has been compromised. If Cassidy Hutchinson knew that Donald Trump was paying the bills, you can't serve two, we usually say two masters, you can't serve two people, you can only serve one. And she would have a legitimate grounds to say, you know what, I don't want Stefan Pasentino being paid by Donald Trump being my lawyer. And she found in her first interview with the Jan 6 committee, she's a young person, a young woman. She took the lawyer that was given to her, but she had a sense, a really creepy, sneaking suspicion that Pasentino wasn't working for her, but he was reporting everything back to Donald Trump and was really representing him. That's why she changed lawyers and picked up counsel, legitimate counsel that's used to dealing with criminal and congressional investigations in Jody Hart. Once she picked him up as a lawyer, a real independent lawyer representing only her interests, she gave full cooperation to the Jan 6 committee and now to the Department of Justice. Mark Meadows is in deep doo-doo, hot water up to his eyeballs for witness tampering. That is a crime. That and the companion crime of obstruction with an official proceeding, which subject him to somewhere between, let's call it 10 to 20 years in prison. He may be willing to take an election and voting fraud charge because he also probably did that as well by voting in 2 districts that he did not reside in while he was in the White House. But that's a relatively minor crime and wouldn't subject him to a lot of jail time. And he would probably do it standing on his head just to protect his president, Donald Trump. But 10 to 15 or 20 years in prison, that really tests the loyalty of somebody that was once beholden to Donald Trump, but is now every person and every criminal for themselves. So if the Department of Justice has Mark Meadows, which we believe they do, by the, what's the anatomical part I'm thinking of? The short hairs, and pulls them or squeezes them hard enough, Mark Meadows being in his own criminal harm's way could be the mother lode of information for the Department of Justice. Think about it. Mark Meadows, the Zelig of the Trump organization, in every room where it matters. He was on the phone call with Donald Trump to Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, interfering with the Georgia election to try to, quote unquote, find 11,000 more votes and throw out already lawfully cast votes, disenfranchise people. He was on the phone with Donald Trump when Donald Trump tried dozens of times, successfully and unsuccessfully, to reach elected officials, Republican Party officials in each state, local election officials, secretaries of state right after the election, to try to convince them to throw the election in his direction and away from Joe Biden. Mark Meadows is on those phone calls. Mark Meadows was one of the architects that helped devise the fake elector scandal and submitting these fake elector certificates to the National Archive. He's also the one that was there for all of the conversations with Donald Trump on Jan 6th and leading into Jan 6th. He was there to observe Donald Trump for the 187 minutes of dereliction of duty in the dining room off the Oval Office. And that is just scratching the surface for for Mark Meadows and what he could provide to the Department of Justice. Cassidy Hutchinson also gave testimony that, her desire to do the right thing, because, she had a very poignant conversation with her mother. This is a young woman, is in her early to mid-20s, and basically said to her mother, and this is in her own testimony, "Mom, I'm effed. These guys have me by my short hairs. I owe everything to them. I'll never get another job in this town if I don't cooperate." And she told the committee the story that only after she read, based on a recommendation of a congressperson that was unnamed, to read about Alexander Butterfield, who was the aide to the chief of staff, John Haldeman, although he didn't have that title back then with Nixon. But that basically he was the similar position to Cassidy Hutchinson. He was the number 2 to the what was then the functional chief of staff for Nixon. He's also the person, Alexander Butterfield, who had the dishonor of being instructed to install the tape recording system, the secret tapes, the Watergate tapes that Nixon used to record every bit of conversation within the Oval Office of his adversaries, of his enemies, of his friends, of his co-conspirators in the Watergate scandal and the break-in of the Democratic National Committee's offices in the Watergate Hotel. So it is, for those that are doing crossword puzzles or Jeopardy, the answer to the question is, who bought and installed the tape recording system? It was Alexander Butterfield, who had to testify to that in front of the version of the Jan 6 hearings back then, the Watergate hearings. And, Cassidy Hutchinson, having read up on him in Wiki of all places, concluded that, okay, profiles encourage, you have to do the right thing. And even though it's very difficult for me, it was very difficult for him, and he was similar aged and all of that, and he did what was right for America, as Cassidy Hutchinson has also done that. So the good news, the silver lining of Mark Meadows' witness tampering with Cassidy Hutchinson and others is that he has created criminal liability for himself and exposure at the upper level of 15 to 20 years, giving the Department of Justice tremendous leverage in their negotiations with him to testify and cooperate with the Department of Justice against Donald Trump. If there needed to be a final nail in the coffin for the decision to prosecute and win the conviction of Donald Trump, it would be the cooperation of a witness just like Mark Meadows with the Department of Justice. We'll continue to evaluate facts on the ground and report them back here on the Meidas Media Network. I'm Michael Popok, co-anchor Legal AF.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.